and giving them independence. What's Malana's thoughts on like homeschooling versus traditional schooling, and is it going to be too much of shielding or vice versa?
Yes, yes, a good question with regard to shielding and homeschooling. My personal advice is that I think most high schools are harmful. Can I say that? Is it okay to say that? As my thoughts, I think most general high school, primary schools, I think you get a few good, alhamdulillah, you can manage, get away with it. It's not great, but I mean, you can manage. But I think most high schools are harmful, except maybe for a few, and there may be a few that are very well protected and very well managed. So I think definitely homeschooling is an option, and if parents do go that way, I feel it beneficial that the homeschoolers themselves start a community. There actually is already a community, because you can still create community even if your child is homeschooling. Because they can still belong to a sports club, they can still go to an afternoon madrasa, they can still have events, so you can still nurture that social aspect and that going out to graze in other spaces. So I think it's an option. It's not for everybody. Not everybody wants their kids at home every day. And I also run a school called Good Tree, so I have lots of thoughts on education and alternative models, which maybe at another time can be discussed. But that is one of the solutions. But the caveat being is that you must still connect yourself to a community, because they cannot grow up without community. And so you have to plug into that community, and that could be in different forms. Yes, so it's definitely an option, inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions?
But that's the challenge that we're facing, like finding mentors for our kids and social groups, because even though they're homeschooled, that's that aspect that we don't actually have. We've been able to navigate through the social spaces and just limit the technology, but that aspect is something that we need to work on.
Yes, yes. I think that the question was with regard to finding community and finding those spaces. I think in Cape Town we are more blessed than perhaps other spaces in the world. Meaning what? That there are groups of people involved in learning about Islam seriously, having gatherings of remembrance. There are good spaces. You have to look for them, but they do exist within Cape Town. And I think sometimes it's just a matter of kind of plugging into that space, because it takes a while to build bonds. And sometimes you have to plug into that space, or you have to volunteer into that space to build that bond. There isn't always like an easy solution. You just apply and click and it's all done. It requires the work of finding the space, attending the spaces, and then building the bonds in those spaces. And I know many of the faces here are familiar because they are in those spaces already. So I think it's just a matter of finding those spaces. And in Cape Town you're blessed because there are many, like this for example is a space. This, for example, here is a space where you're meeting people. And spaces like these nurture those bonds for further development, inshallah. So I think this is the path to the change. And in this, you might find a role model. You might find a fellow parent with a similar age child. You might find those things, but it does take some work in terms of exposure. May Allah bless and make it easy, inshallah.
So a large part of us, I mean, even as parents, we're not equipped enough to answer those questions. So I feel that that's where space is lacking. Like, there's no, I mean, I think it was here actually that I had this the speaker from the UK, where he was saying in the Advent, where Islam was at the height of the Ottoman Empire, and the youth were embracing Islam completely, was because they could ask any question at any point, and there were scholars kind of hands-on. So how do you think we can navigate the space with that kind of challenge? Creation
yes.
of those spaces.
Yes, yes. So I think first of all to be assured that the answers exist.
Yeah,
and the scholars exist, and mashallah amongst your teachers here are amongst those here who are dealing with those questions on a day-to-day basis and dealing with the youth on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's the first point of departure. The second thing is that there aren't sufficient spaces yet to train children and young people on all of those questions. But I think with a bit of creativity, because sometimes there are the spaces. I, for example, run Mizan Institute. It's mostly like for parents and professionals and older students. But these are the discussions we'd have on a regular basis. Seekers also have a number of courses where these questions will be answered. So it might be a virtual space like Seekers, or it might be a physical space like certain classes. So again, you have to seek them. You have to seek them to find them. But I do agree that one thing I think we failed with in Cape Town is that we have not created enough spaces for the youth. And it's not the failure of the ulama, it's a failure of the collective. That we have not created enough space for our youth to have healthy grazing spaces. And we will suffer the consequences for it. We will suffer the consequences for it. And we are suffering it, that we have not created those spaces where I can say, okay, I'm going to send my kids there on a Friday or there on a... Those spaces are few and far between. There are a few individuals trying, mashallah, but for the tens of thousands of youth that we have not created. And we'll pay and we are paying the price, so there is work to be done. So if you want to work, let me know, inshallah, I have work for you. No. Anything else? Anything from our back row there, inshallah? Or back 3 rows, mashallah? Bismillah. Gulam, you can come a bit forward, inshallah, just to hear.
Shukran. Is this thing working? It's not. Oh, okay. We've been discussing things on a sort of small community scale, but most of the challenges are being created by forces and powers and engineered at levels that is giving us the situation, the environment, the landscape that we have. So while one obviously concerned about one's family and young children, the sort of butterfly effect, what happens on the other side, is also impacting on our spaces. So to what extent can we as a community provide spaces and platforms where we can challenge these organizations that are constantly working at undermining our attempts at providing the spaces for our families and our children to grow in the society? Because I don't think that the society is happening by itself. It is a conscious, deliberate, engineered space that's been created by the powers that be. Thank you.
Yes. So definitely there's an onslaught against religion and against morality and revelation and ethics. And it is one discussion, yes, that there's a response required from us as the adults. And I think that's a different discussion platform. But what I would say with regard to parenting specifically is that my personal intention is when I engage with youth is that in a few years we won't be around anymore. And yes, we might do what we can to counter macro forces now, and we might have limited abilities now. But we do need to constantly prepare the next generation to fight the good fight. And so from a purely parenting perspective, that is part of your preparation, is that you have to prepare them to navigate these macro forces, and amongst them, there may be someone who is the mujaddid, who is the renewer of faith, who is able to speak truth to power, who is able to influence many minds, amongst them perhaps, but it cannot be a wish, it has to be a conscious development. Meaning what we have to consciously develop our children to navigate this world and to speak up against falsehood. And so yes, whilst we have work to do as adults, part of our work is preparing the next generation to do that. And that's my hope. And I believe that if we don't do that, it's almost like Islam requires a critical mass for it to survive. And it did not survive in North America after the Muslim slaves went over. It did not survive in South America after the Arabs went over. It did not survive. It did not survive because there were not enough scholars and there weren't enough of a critical mass. So I don't think, and don't take our Islam for granted here. That if I come back here in 100 years' time, I don't know how strong our Muslim Ummah will be. And so we have to develop that critical mass to carry Islam. And from that critical mass will rise up, inshallah, leaders who are able to transform society on a macro level. But it's not done through tamanni, through just empty wishes. It's done through work. It's done through humans who are shaping other humans to carry the mantle. And this has always been the formula of Islam. And this is how Islam has been preserved in the Western Cape and many societies. It has to be this transmission that we keep doing. And don't underestimate the power of the transmission. Because you can't teach the youth the solution, but you can give them the tools. Because their solution in 50 years' time is a battle we won't recognize. But we have to give them the tools, which are the building blocks to fight that battle. And that's what our goal is that we do. So definitely there is an onslaught, and we have to prepare those to fight the good fight, inshallah ta'ala. Barakallah. So may Allah bless, and we'll end there, inshallah ta'ala. I'll be around for a few minutes. I think we have Asr break now, and I'll be around for a few minutes if you want some offline questions. But may Allah bless and guide us all. May Allah bless your parenting and your hard work that Allah sees and Allah will reward you for. And may Allah respond to all your earnest du'as for your children and make them of the true believers who are happy and content and who are capable and who themselves, inshallah, will have good families and good children, and we will all gather together in paradise. بإذن الله تعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه بارك وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Jazakallah khair to Maulana Khalil for his presentation and the responses to those questions. The adhan went at around 4, so I think we can take a break for our Asr Salah at the masjid, and then we can reconvene with the second presentation in about 20 minutes, inshallah, if that's fine.
speaker, the other one goes into the screen. That's connected to the speaker. I can use a cable also, but it also records. Eh? It's very, very loud. You know? But there's always different ways of doing it. So if you have a specific need, what I can do for you is rather to come and look at your need and then give you like a tailor-made sort of imaging. We reading it up? Yes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So welcome back to everyone, and particularly to our viewers online. We'll now commence with the second presentation, the second and final presentation today, Anchoring Faith, Nurturing Islamic Identity in a Sea of Cultural Influences. And again, we're privileged to have Muhammad Qah, a senior scholar within our community, someone who is well-grounded in fiqh and in various other Islamic sciences, and involved in many on-ground grassroots organizations, and Imam at the Awal Masjid. So we are again fortunate to have someone who has experience with the youth, with children, and with society in general. And I just wanted to emphasize that we should show appreciation to the fact that within our community in South Africa, Cape Town particularly, that we have scholars. I think one of the questions earlier was, how do we ensure that we safeguard the identity and that we safeguard the iman of our children and of ourselves? And it's by attachment, as Mulana Khalil mentioned, by building bonds with the Muslim community. And we shouldn't look at this in a way that, you know, that certain segments of society or certain individuals hold a higher hierarchy or position. It's rather that as a collaborative process, we are all in this together. So if we are not willing to humble ourselves in the sense that we have to go to scholars and individuals who have expertise in a certain field, then we are all going to suffer, every single one of us. So we're fortunate to have them in our presence to guide us and to share with us their experiences. And it just reminds me of a very important saying or athar of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, Sayyidul Qawm khadimuhum, that the leader of people, of society, are those who serve. And I think there's no better personification of our scholars here today, our colleagues and our teachers, than that hadith, that they are individuals who are serving at the forefront with our youth, and so therefore they are the most qualified to share and to speak and to guide us in that regard. So I'd like to call upon Mulana Muhammad, inshallah, for his presentation.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in wa ba'du. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I like to be introduced because I find the introduction rather amusing. But our scholars say there's a scholarly way of dealing with that. And that is when somebody introduces you for qualities that you'd know that do not exist within you, then you should understand it as a dua. So whatever Dr. Mulana Yusuf has said, we say Amin to his dua, inshallah. And I think it's an important thing, because if it on the basis that it perhaps has some truth in it, it's also very important for us to maintain humbleness and humility, and understand when somebody is saying something good about us, that is really dua for us, or some others say that it is really the satar, the covering of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that has reached a certain level of perfection, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has covered your faults to that degree that people aren't aware of it. But be it as it may, inshallah, we'll jump straight into no, I think I shared the wrong presentation, Mona. Let me share the other one. Just give me one moment. So, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri, wa ahlul uqadatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. So, I've been asked to talk about the identity. How do we develop an Islamic identity within our kids? Perhaps just as a starter, we have kids, and there's a particular Islamic construct to the relationship between ourselves and our kids. So in Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about granting you kids, Allah says, يَهَبُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ إِنَاثًا وَيَهَبُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ الذُّكُورُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a kid, and to some Allah gives you male boys, and to some others female girls. And if Allah so wished, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could cause a lady to be barren, and despite that you married and you may employ the means of creating kids, Allah doesn't grant you kids. So the important point that I always dwell upon is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constructs a kid as a hiba, a gift. Now when we look at modes of ownership, you can buy something, you pay for it, and you become the owner. You treat that thing in a particular way. But I think generally when we receive a gift, somebody gives us something, then we attach a greater value to it. Sometimes it's sentimental. Something you bought, you will sell. But if somebody gifted something to you, perhaps it is a bit more difficult for you to impart with it. And then depending on the gifter, the person giving it to you, you treat it differently. So here the wahib, the gifter, is none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in what capacity do we have children? We have it as a gift. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given these kids to us as a gift. And as alluded to in the other talks, it is really a trust which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed with us. So we are, as parents, primarily responsible for developing the identity of our kids. I'm going to short circuit, and as things come to mind, I'm not necessarily going to follow the PowerPoint presentation, but as things come to mind, I'll mention them. So we are, by and large, as parents, yes, there may be a number of different influences in terms of our children. But from an Islamic perspective, the primary influencer of our kids are ourselves. So we need to take ownership of that. But all is not doom and gloom. The Prophet ﷺ says to us, and this works for us and not against us, Al-mawlud yuladu al-fitra. We believe that when a child is born, then that child is born on a natural dispensation. And that natural dispensation is an acknowledgement of the existence of a creator. And I think there's ample scientific evidence to actually prove that. So children are born with the capacity to believe in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to acknowledge that they have a creator who had brought them out from non-existence into existence. They have the capacity for that. However, what happens is when they come from the other realm into this realm, then things become a bit complicated. So if you pre-birth, what our scholars refer to as the verse of Alast, in the world of the souls, we appeared in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah posed a rhetorical question to us and said to us, Alastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? And at that time, we existed but as subtle beings, as souls. And there were no other distractions, not even this temporary locus, which is our bodies. There wasn't even that influence which exerted itself on the soul. The soul was pure. And the soul in its pure state responded to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and said, Bala, absolutely. But then we came into this world, and in this world we are no longer that single being, that single entity, a soul. We are placed into a body. And placed into that body, that very placement creates a bit of a complication, a challenge. Because now what happens is we have a soul which is terrestrial, which seeks to turn to Allah. And we have a body which is terrestrial. It's from the ground, it's from the clay. So becomes a tug of war and a challenge really. And this is the challenge really in terms of life, between the material and the spiritual. So Allah creates us, and we come into this world, and our nature is to turn towards Allah, as was facilitated in terms of that particular verse. So therefore the Prophet ﷺ says, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every single child that comes into this world, that child comes upon its natural disposition. And the natural disposition is that he believes in Allah, the existence of Allah and the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately, as an objective of life, Allah, the one who had created us in terms of our form, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also created a law. And that law complements our natural form. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about that particular coming together of our natural disposition and the natural laws. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to it as nurun ala nur, light upon light. And so Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. What is that light that Allah talks about? That if you're born on a natural disposition and you maintain that natural disposition, when the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relates to that natural disposition, what do we find? It complements each other. And therefore, in that particular light, you can describe Islam as a natural law. I mean, you can look at any given law. Let's talk about sexuality. If you identify as a male, it very much, and you are male, then it's in sync with nature, so to say. But if you're male and you identify as a female, it's a bit difficult to do that particular syncing. So Islam is a natural law. So every person is born on that natural law. But then the Prophet ﷺ says now, you come into this worldly realm, we have already established, when you come into this worldly realm, you have a locus, which is your body. And that is a challenge in and of itself, because your body is terrestrial and it pulls you down. The law of gravity. It draws you towards itself, materialism. No. But then you have the celestial part as well. So what happens now is, when you come into this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَكِنَّ وَلَكِنْ أَبَوَاهُ. The first influencer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the parents. أَبَوَاهُ يَهُوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ. The parents, and this is a clear example where we don't go with the literal wording of the narration. The literal wording says that the parents either cause him to become a Christian, in other words, associate partners unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not believe in one Allah. Or the parents, they cause him to become a Jew, or they cause him to become a Zoroastrian, a fire worshipper. But obviously it's not limited to that. In today's time, the environment that we create for our children could very well not facilitate for Judaism or Christianity. It could very well facilitate for all of those other isms that we have: modernism, secularism, liberalism, atheism, and all of these things. But my first point would be that the primary influencer, and my sort of slides primarily deals with you as a parent and the fact that you are the primary influencer. And for us to own that and realize that to a certain degree that our kids are an extension really of our influence. So how we influence them, in other words, we create a certain product, and that product is basically our creation. So the topic reads identity, and the resource material that I employ to create this PowerPoint talks about identity. So what does identity mean? Who am I? What do I value? And what do I want to do with my life? So this ties in with Mona Khalil's presentation in terms of putting those goals in front of you and basically working towards realizing those goals. But who am I? How do I identify as? Who am I? And I think it's very important that if I were to ask you, who are you, how would you respond? How would you respond? And this is very important. Who am I? And you're going to influence your kids to a large degree to be the same thing. So who are you? So as Muslims, we identify as slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know there may be a sensitivity in the English language in terms of using the word slave, but for lack of a better translation, the Arabic term is abd. So how do I identify? I identify as a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if I'm the slave, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my master. And a slave basically is at the behest of his master. His master will command him to do certain things, and his master will prohibit him from doing other things. This might sound very simple, or maybe even crass, but it's very important. Because if we identify as slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we're unable to identify as certain other things. For example, a liberalism. There's a verse in the Holy Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى. Imam Shafi'i gives a term, and they refer to that as a Sudawiyya. Sudawiyya is a person that doesn't consider himself to be mandated to do anything or prohibited from anything. Nobody tells me what to do, nobody tells me what not to do. That is a liberalist, a Sudawi. So I cannot identify as a slave of Allah on the one hand, but I also identify as a liberalist on the other hand. No. When I identify as a Muslim, being a Muslim, liberalism and Islam, like many other, are mutually exclusive things. I can't be a Muslim and liberal at the same time. But getting back to the point is, who am I? So ideally as Muslims, we need to teach our kids that we identify as slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When does this particular identification take place? So here we have, and this is also like quite interesting because we talk about adolescence. You know, when we talk about the time frame in terms of our development, the timeline for us. So in a Western paradigm, which is by and large our paradigm, you have a child, then you have a teenager or adolescent, and then you have an adult. And I'm going to use this adolescent point, but it's important for us to understand that within Islam, you are a child, and from childhood, you transition to becoming an adult. And part of the problem that we have is, we have a child, then that child, as opposed to becoming an adult, becomes a teenager. And adolescence and teenager is really a time period which goes up to about 10 years sometimes, where an adult is allowed to be a child for longer than what they're supposed to be. And most of our problems that we get is really in the adolescence. But for purposes of our talk, we're talking about Islamic identity. So this identity, where is it developed? It's really developed in the adolescent years. In other words, when this person becomes of sound mind. You know, we talk about becoming mukallaf. What does mukallaf mean? Aqil baligh. You consider to have a certain degree of intellectual capacity. Aqil, you have an intellect. Mullah Khalil was talking about the importance of intellect. And then also, you are considered to be physically mature. Aqil baligh. It's interesting, don't you think, that a child, a Muslim child, develops his or her identity when they become adult. We're talking adolescence, but for us, basically when they become an adult. So here, for me, there's 2 points. Number one is, if the child is going to develop their identity, or the adult is going to develop their identity in early teenage years, then the fact that you're born in a Muslim home doesn't guarantee that you are Muslim. Yes, it will help you. But the fact that you are born, and many, like in America, there's a stat that says about 20% currently of youngsters that are born in Muslim homes, 20% of them, in their adulthood, they don't consciously choose Islam as a way of life. So that stat tells you that there's no guarantee really that if you're born in a Muslim home, you're going to grow into an adult Muslim. And sometimes we think that, if I can maybe ask, we sort of have this idea in our minds that if you're born in a Muslim home, then you are going to develop into a Muslim adult. My understanding from an Islamic point of view is that from an Islamic point of view, there is not that expectancy. From an Islamic theological point of view, there is not that expectancy. And what is that based on? That's based on the fact that when it comes to, like, matters of secondary matters, for example, somebody asks you, are you Shafi'i or Hanafi? Says, no, I'm Shafi'i. So Shafi'i is, for example, they say Amin loudly. So you ask, why do you say Amin loudly? I say Amin loudly because my father says Amin loudly. So in other words, I'm blind, for lack of a better term, I'm blind following him. When it comes to issues like that, it's acceptable. My father says Amin loudly, I say Amin loudly. However, if you were to be asked, not in this environment, you just ask a scholar, even if you go 100, 200, 300 years ago, if you ask a scholar, are you a Muslim? If he asks you, are you Muslim? And you say yes, and he asks you, why are you a Muslim? If you say, because my father is a Muslim, then it becomes unacceptable. Because it's a matter of belief. And in matters of belief, for example, in one of the famous poems relating to Islamic theology, relating to matters of belief, matters of creed, the author says, فَكُلُّ مَنْ قَلَّدَ فِي التَّوْحِيدِ إِيمَانُهُ لَمْ يَخْلُ مِنْ تَرْدِيدِ. Any person who blindly follows in matters of belief. If you want to believe, you need to have certainty. So whoever blindly follows another in terms of belief, then his belief is not free of tardidi, of doubt. Belief, iman, means conviction, a firm resolve. I can't believe in Allah because somebody else believes in Allah. I can't go on somebody else's conviction, even if it's a parent. I must go on my own conviction. So I think for me it's somewhat, or I'm hoping to achieve hereby, that it actually, it takes away this expectancy, man. This expectancy that my child got born in a Muslim home, that he must develop into a Muslim adult. It takes that expectancy away. If you want your child to be a Muslim adult, you have to consciously work towards this because it is a conscious decision which your child must take, and you must facilitate for your child. And how do you facilitate for it? It's very easy. Because we believe that the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our scholars differ in this particular regard, but many believe that it's axiomatically known. You don't really have to think about it. Because it's so apparent. And there are a number of arguments. For example, we're not talking about that, but just to impress upon you how simple it is. So our scholars, they present a number of arguments. I'll mention 3 simple arguments. The one argument would be dalilul khalq wal insha. You see something created, and I say to you that this thing created itself. What did you think of my mental faculties? You'd think I'm insane. It must have taken you a long time to put this PowerPoint together, didn't it? I said, no, actually, the PowerPoint, formulated by itself. It just fell together like that. I didn't realize, but there's actually also, if I do this and then it comes like that. So it comes by itself. No, it doesn't come by itself. So that's something to be created, there must be a creator. So if I'm a created entity, I have a beginning and an end, it means there's a creator that brought me from non-existence into existence, number 1. Number 2 is dalilun nizam. There's an order to things. If you come around and you see one stone lying there, and I tell you that, look at that stone came by itself, it may appear to be plausible. But now if you see 2 stones there, it's a bit more difficult for me to explain how 2 stones put in a particular form came there by itself. What makes it even more difficult is if I have 3 stones and it's in like a tripod and you find there's some ashes in the, what's the name? I said, no, the 3 stones formed by itself and the ashes just came by itself there. Even more ludicrous for us. And the last proof, our scholar, is that just innately, on one radio program I was in, the presenter was an atheist. And in his desperation he said, and those of you who believe in a God, call out to that God. What drove him to say that? It's because intuitively all of us believe that there is an Allah, there is a God. Okay. So that's not my point really. My point here is that Islamic identity of the child, it needs to be developed. The fact that they were born into a Muslim home is going to facilitate for that. But there's going to come a time where you will have to have this discussion with your kids and not simply assume that they were born in a Muslim home and they're going to become Muslim adults. No, it doesn't work like that. And not because of the influences that we have in today's time, but because this has always been our reality. When we believe, we don't believe blindly. Not in terms of belief. We can follow other things blindly. But in terms of our belief in Allah, if you say, I believe in Allah, and you expect your kids to say that they believe in Allah, they must do so on conviction, and they must do so based on proof. So it might seem that, okay, they must become Islamic theologians. No, not necessarily. Our scholars say that if a kid, for example, goes out there and he says, Subhanallah, glory be to Allah, that statement is sufficient to say that he believes based on proof. Why? Because looking at this wondrous creation and his words, that exclamation of his entails the fact that he acknowledges that there's a creator. Why? Because he's seen the signs of the creator and he's put two and two together. Yeah? Like smoke indicates to a fire, he says this creation indicates to a creator, and that is sufficient. So this exercise of developing belief, it's an important exercise. And even like our scholars do say that you can have a situation, maybe Anis is looking a bit worried, but you can have a situation whereby maybe a parent didn't take out the trouble of actually, engaging and getting the child to consciously, based on proof, accept Islam. So they ask, like, you Muslim, but have you embraced Islam? I think it's an important question to ask in today's time. Let's say the parent hasn't done that, but that child is actually Muslim. And the child is so convinced by the integrity of his parents that he says, I'm a Muslim because my parents are Muslim. And, he has this blind belief, but the belief is firm and resolute. You will enter into paradise. But that's not the ideal. The ideal is that when a child believes in Allah, then he believes in Allah not because he's following somebody else, but he believes in Allah because he's convinced himself or herself. And the only thing you can do is facilitate for that. And it's very easy to facilitate as we indicated. Every morning when the sun rises, who brings the sun up? Who causes the sun to go down? Now, when you go out in nature and you witness, like Mullah Khalil was pointing out, the signs of Allah within creation. وَفِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ آيَةٌ تَدُلُّ عَلَى أَنَّهُ وَاحِدٌ. Everything which you see, what do you see? You see the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore they tell us, and this is part of the developing of the identity. فَانْظُرْ إِلَىٰ نَفْسِكَ ثُمَّ انْتَقِلِي. Say, if you want to look and you want to behold the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a proof of His existence, look no further than yourself. At the wondrous way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you. Did you create yourself? No, you didn't. Allah created you. And then, ثُمَّ انْتَقِلِي لِلْعَالَمِ الْعُلْوِ ثُمَّ السُّفْلِ. Then look to the skies above you. Look to the ground below you. What will you find? تَجِدْ بِهِ صُنْعًا بَدِيعَ الْحِكَامِ. You will find a wondrous creation which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. So the first point is that you need to develop an Islamic identity. That is not guaranteed by the fact that he or she is in a Muslim home. And many times, I don't know about you, but if we don't engage in this type of conversation, we're not too comfortable. Like if I asked you to speak about Allah, how long can we speak about Allah? And if we don't speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to come within our hearts. So we need to speak to our kids on a daily basis about Allah. And the greatest thing that you can give your kids, as we will see, time depending, is the greatest thing, the greatest gift that you can give to your kids is the gift of Allah. There's nothing that equates to that. Not an education, not a life policy, nothing beats giving your child Allah. Because if your child is Allah, they have everything. And if they don't have Allah, ostensibly they may have something, but in reality they have nothing. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala place Allah in our hearts, and by extension in the hearts of our kids. So what is meant by religious identity? This is also a very interesting point. So the first thing is, Muslim home, inshallah, that culminates into a person that submits to Allah and he becomes a true Muslim. Now, then, when you become a Muslim, what happens? And this is, I think, a very important point to acknowledge this type of symbiosis. And it's a problem that we have in today's time. So some people define religiosity as ascribing to a particular religious group without any behavioral ramifications. So I identify as a Muslim, but that's not enough. You must identify as a Muslim. In order to be a Muslim, that identification, that internal identification, must manifest in terms of your behavior. And therefore, we focus on religious identity as something deeper than influences how something deeper that influences how a person lives. And I think this is also a challenge that we have in today's time. What happens is that we say, like many of us, we say that, you know, my Islam is here. And so, in other words, that's the esoteric part of my Islam. I believe. But then, we somehow tell ourselves that I can do without the exoteric part. I can be a believer in as far as my heart is concerned, but that belief doesn't have to manifest itself. So Allah questions that in terms of Quran. And Allah talks to exactly that point. وَمَا يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. A person who aggrandizes the signs of Allah. And the signs of Allah is when Allah tells you to do something, you do something, so it manifests on your limbs. Where does it come from? That comes from an inner consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that if you and I claim that there's an inner consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it must manifest in terms of outward behavior. And that is fundamentally important. So when we talk about the religious identity, we talk about three things. And this is what we seek to develop within our children. Number one is, and most importantly, the belief. You know, because what is inside is more important than what is outside, very importantly. But at the same time, also religious practice. And very importantly, community. When we have these three things working in a symbiosis, then we can guarantee that inshallah, my child will, you know, be a Muslim child, adolescent, and developed into a Muslim adult that will benefit himself or herself and the community at large. Just a number two, religious practice. So, you know, if you believe in Allah, you believe in His messenger, they brought us a way of life. One of the salient features of our belief, you know, they say that Iman has a number of branches. One of the branches is modesty. So if you identify as a Muslim, then internally you're going to have this quality of modesty. But then this quality of modesty needs to manifest itself. And how does it manifest ourselves? In the way that we dress, men folk and women folk. But the unique thing, and this is very important for us to understand, is that symbiosis between our internal belief, number one, and our religious practice. The one supports the other. And I'm sure you've had this experience. You have a choice so you have modesty in your heart. Now, you have a choice when you go out that, look, I'm going to don a scarf. Now, when you don the scarf, which is an outward manifestation of modesty, how does that relate again to your internal consciousness in terms of modesty? Does it aid it or does it drive it away? It naturally aids it. And you'd find that you may have a conviction in terms of modesty is a condition of the heart, which it absolutely is. But I'm not altogether concerned in terms of manifesting that out there. You know, that's not part of how I identify. What we find is that your non-practice, which is secondary to your inner state within you, it actually impacts on your inner state. It waters down, it chips away at what you may have had in terms of modesty as an internal state. So very importantly in the world that we live in is to understand that identifying as a Muslim is not only limited, and this is Allah's wisdom. There's a reason why Allah tells you to do something and not to do other things. It all works in a symbiosis. And the claim that despite my exoteric non-compliance to Islam, esoterically I'm 100% okay, it doesn't work like that. Because Allah's designed it in a particular way that the one supports the other. And therefore, it's not one at the at the expense of the other, but rather it's a symbiosis between the two. And many of the problems that we have in today's time is because there's extremities either in terms of exoteric. You find a person that if you look at him, no, 100%. Sorry to use this example, but maybe the beard is the right length. You know, the pants is also, the beard is long enough, the pants are short enough, and everything exoterically. But there's no soul in there, and it's problematic. Because Allah doesn't look at the external, Allah looks at the internal. The other extreme again is the person, ostensibly you can't identify the person as a Muslim. And it maybe happens sometimes you say hi to the guy, then he says, wa alaikum salam, and then he gives you like that look. Can't you see I'm Muslim? I can't, maaf. I'm just like saying, maaf, I'm just saying. So the other extreme is when and you may have it in your heart, but Allah created it as such that there's a symbiosis between what you have in your heart and your external practice, and the one complements each other. And when you leave the one for the other one, you may find yourself in a bit of a complication. And Allah SWT knows best. So that's basically the religious identity, and Allah knows best. So the optimal Islamic identity includes when you self-identify as a Muslim. In other words, your kids have to do this on their own and come to that conviction, and you can facilitate for that. But ultimately, they need to believe on their own. And to come to that belief is very simple. Then internalizing Islamic values and beliefs and living a life in accordance with the guidance of Islam within a community. Now, you know, we said now that, you know, your child is coming to a Muslim home, so your child is a Muslim. But your child has to embrace Islam when they come of sound mind, they're able to make their own choice. I'm not saying you must leave the choice to them. You must facilitate for it. You don't leave the choice to them, but you must ensure that they believe, but they believe based on their own conviction, not on your conviction. And it's very easy to convince them of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because it's almost self-evident. You with me? But now there's an important thing. This decision that they're going to take to actually embrace Islam is the adult decision which they're going to make. But many times, things that you and I do impacts on the decision that they make. So what happens is, they're going to make this decision when they become adults. But because we displayed Islam in a particular way, we displayed it in a way that as opposed to drawing people closer to Islam, actually pushes them away. And this is the important, and I think many people in my anecdotal experience, they detest Islam. Muslim kids growing up in Muslim homes, and it's generally a very strict Muslim home. And it's almost like when they become adults, it's like a lion out of a cage. That if you tell them to pray, then they have such trauma about being told to pray or maybe coerced into praying, that when you tell them to pray, they're going to show you they're not going to pray. People have told me this themselves. So it's important that we nurture they came to us as a gift. And with that propensity to believe in Allah in this way that will ensure their felicity in this world as well as in the year after, they came with that potential. We simply have to nurture that to a point where they're able to make that decision, and they make that decision themselves, and not to impair that process in any way. Because Allah, like in another place now, the Quran Allah tells, وَتَذُوقُ السُّوءَ بِمَا صَدَدْتُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. You will experience the evil of that which you have prevented from the path of Allah. What is Allah talking about? And maybe this extraneous example will help us greatly. As a Muslim person, so I'm dealing with a non-Muslim. So whether I, like say I'm Muslim, on my behalf, he identifies me as a Muslim. I give him my word. I go back on my word. Tomorrow I invite him to Islam. What does he say? So what have I done? Inadvertently, what have I done? I've actually pushed people away from Islam. So that is another example. You and I as parents, if we don't model that Islamic behavior, which is beautiful by its very nature, and then what's going to happen, it could very well be that we actually serve as the barriers between our kids embracing Islam. What I mean by embracing Islam is like truly identifying as slaves and servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can very well become the barriers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So the next issue, and I'm going to go quickly through this. How much time do I have left? Oh, that's mashallah. That's great. So you just give me indication when it's 5 minutes, no? And then I can. So, so we have the kids, our kids. They came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They come into this world. They come into a particular environment. And I think it's important for us, Mona Khalil was saying the whole time, not being naive. It's important for us to be realistic in terms of what's happening. We are the primary influencers. And let nobody take that away from you. Yes, they're influenced by this, that, and the other. You know, sometimes at home, when the kids display unruly behavior, you wonder to yourself, where did they get that from? It's from you. You like, in Afrikaans they say, jy's verbaas. You're like shocked in terms of where they got this behavior from. They got it from you. So, you know, it's very important to understand that you actually do as Allah would have it. Allah didn't stack everything up against you, man. You are one of the primary influencers, but you're not the only influencer. And it's important for us to realize. And we talk about nested environments. So what do we mean by nested environments is that environments that not exist completely independent of one another. Rather, they are layered one inside the other. So the environments that your child comes into, that we actually subsist in, is you have your family, you have a community, which is basically your society, and the overall culture. And if you start from the end, the overall culture, which is now the culture that we find ourselves, what culture do we find ourselves in? We need to acknowledge we live in a secular state. And secularism means that there's separation between church and God. So the state, in terms of the state-run functions, it's not that they're indifferent towards religion. They, by their very nature, are anti-religion because they want to cut out religion from everything. So that's the overall environment that we live in. So government is not going to help in terms of the religious identity of your child. A run-of-the-mill school is not going to. That's the bigger in terms of the macro culture and society that we find ourselves in. Then we have the community that we find ourselves in, and then we have the family. But right at the center of the family, the most important thing would be the family and the parents, in other words, you. And here they talk about socialization. Now, you know, one thing I do, and I find it very informative, is that, what do you think is socialization? I didn't know what socialization was. I use the word all the time. Social, I use it all the time. What I find very beneficial, especially in today's time, the words that we use, many of us, we don't know the meanings of it. And what I find interesting is that if you go to the word, for example, I don't go to the dictionary word. I mean, to the normal dictionary, like the lexicon. I don't go there. I go to an etymological dictionary. In other words, I want to know what the root of the word is. Now, when you go to social, the word social, it has a number of origins. One of the origins is a Latin origin. And I don't know how to pronounce it, but something like sociality. And sociality actually means companion. So when your child comes, your child is a social being that comes into a social structure. Your child is going to become the company that that child keeps. That's socialization. It's simply the company. And it's very profound. Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, he gives you only one tip for parenting. And, you know, I think we heard all of the challenges, but Islam provides solutions which are simple yet very profound. I'm giving you the solution in light of a contemporary term which they call socialization. Your children are socialized. And therefore, there's no objectivity in what you say. Leave the child, let the child decide itself. The child cannot anthropologically decide by itself unless you leave the child alone to die. But the child is always going to find themselves in a social structure. And whatever social structure the child finds itself in, the child is going to adopt and be socialized like that. So where's the objectivity? It's impossible, in as far as my understanding is. And then, therefore, Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, he gives you one tip for children. Only one tip. It's simple yet profound in light of the word socialization. He says that if you want to see to the nurturing upbringing of your children, watch their company. Finish. Because they become the company that they keep. And if you think about it, human beings are like water. You take water, you throw coffee granules in there, or we throw chicory in. But that's not, what's the name? Like Frisco. Throw it in there, what does it become? Becomes Frisco. You take the same water and you put a tea bag in the tea leaves, what does it become? Tea. And therefore they say, as-sahib sahib in Arabic. That your companion, what does he do? He draws from you. Imam Ghazali says, kids are like thieves. What do? In the company that they find themselves in, they steal character traits, they adopt those character traits. And that's socialization. Now, when a child comes in, you can't say that, look, I'm going to leave the child, man. Because the child is, if you leave it, that's a conscious socialization choice that you're making for the child. Because the child is going to become what you project upon the child. So, I don't know if I'm making myself clear. Socialization, the word social comes from companion. The child becomes the company that they keep. So, you need to be that good company. So, socialization entails social learning that derives from continuing interactions between individuals and those who influence them. It sounds like a very big academic term, but it's actually a very simple term. Socialization basically means a company that the child keeps, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now, so there's a narration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I knew I didn't to put narration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because I'm going to forget the narration in there. I forget. But if I just give me a moment to think, I'll get it now. That there is overwhelming empirical evidence that the most important source of religious socialization is the family. نعم ولكن هناك واحد ثاني. But I forget it, man. But inshallah, it's a very important one, but I can't now go to the other slide and stuff, but the hadith. What do you say? Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik alayhi wa ala alihi. Allahumma salli wa sallim. So we go through, and normally when I come towards the end, and then it comes back to me. Okay. So, okay. So now, you are the main influencer. That's the message that comes across now. And your children are basically going to become what environment you create for them. So now parents have only one good and hopefully effective way to raise children to understand and carry on their family's religion. Like you want them to become Muslims. How's that? They're social beings. They're going to become what you are. So that is for parents simply to practice their own personal faith. The better Muslim you are, the greater guarantee you're going to have that your children are going to be Muslim. That's basically what it says. And parents are the first sources of spiritual modeling. And although children, and this is very important, you can explain to your kids the theory of what it means to be a good Muslim, but what they actually require is for you to display that behavior in order for them to mimic it. And I think this is also where we get it wrong. We tell them, the importance of truth and how you must speak the truth. But do we mimic that? So the children don't only, we're the main influencers, but they don't need us to tell them in theory what to do. They need us to show them what to do, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So how do we do this? In the last few minutes that we have left, inshallah, I'm going to dedicate to this. So number one is, you can explain to them in theory. My experience with kids, and I read this about Shaykh Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi rahmatullah alayhi, and it really helps me greatly. Your children, your colleagues, your husband and wife, they are not robots that you can switch on and switch off. They're part robot, but the more part is a human part, which is the emotional part. It's like one day I was, if you want, you don't switch on somebody on and switch somebody off. You have to nurture them and prepare them, and then you ask them, to comply. One day I was with my daughter in the garden, and it was dry, so she was with a hose, and I said, no, you can't hose yet. Let me first prepare the ground. So she says, why are you doing that? I says, because if you don't prepare the ground and then you put the water's going to run away. So the water's there. Is the water beneficial? Yes, it is. But if I don't prepare the ground and the water's going to run away, the plants are going to benefit. Likewise, when we're talking to our children, you need to first prepare their hearts. You can't just give them like, it's going to go on now, the electricity came back on, now all the lights are going to switch on. No, it doesn't work like that when it comes to human beings. You must prepare the hearts before you say what you want to say to them. So therefore, emotional closeness, studies find that not for you to preach to your children the whole time, but if you have emotional closeness with them, then that also guarantees religious continuity. You want to facilitate that they continue to be Muslims, you must develop an emotional close relationship with them. Now, so when you look at the messengers, when they came to give the da'wah, your child must understand. Many of us, we use religion as a weapon against our children. Almost like a type of a punishment. And we shouldn't do that. When the messengers, before they came to the people, what did they say? Look here, man. Do I want you to become a Muslim because I have a cult and the more followers I have, the better for me? No. When they came and they said, Inni lakum nasihun amin, I have your goodwill at heart. So you know, if you want to diffuse a situation with your kids, before you tell them what you want them to do, if you can successfully impress upon them that, look man, I really have your goodwill at heart. If they understand that from you, and you can tell them that and display that in terms of your behavior, then you can ask them to do anything. So goodwill, emotional closeness, and emotional closeness for me is developed by having goodwill for your kids. And so now what happens is you're very close with your kids, now, and you have a warm, loving, fuzzy relationship with them. But at the same time, you don't have religious discussions. You shy away. No, I can't have this talk. I'm uncomfortable with it. One of the most successful guarantors of religious continuity is when you have religious discussions with him. But you can't just have it out of the blue. Yeah? But you must have it after you have closeness and there's goodwill and there's sincerity. And now you have the religious discussions. It will play a great role. And our last point, inshallah, my time is up. But this was quite a unique one the last point. I see the brothers looking at me, they're very expectantly. Empirical evidence shows that, it is on the board, that there's a T missing. Father plays a greater role. This is very unique. Now, what happens is, that's why I like some psychologists. Because psychologists, they deal with empirical evidence. And empirical evidence don't lie. But this is you're supposed to be frowning at this statistical fact. Because kids spend more time with their mothers. So you would imagine that they spend more time with their mothers. So in other words, they're going to latch onto the belief of the mothers. Empirical evidence shows otherwise. I didn't do the study. The resource is verifiable. They did the studies. And they said that the father plays a greater role. So it's like, it's a unique thing. And it's quite also because in our kitabs, we talk about hadana custody. So let's say, for example, that the child chooses the mother. Because from an Islamic perspective, when the child reaches a particular age, then the choice is given to the child. You choose which parent you want to be with. So if the child chooses the mother, then al-fuqaha say that the child must still be with the father in the day, recommended, so the father can teach the child. So why I'm saying this is because many times, like us, we say, look, I go work and I sit. Everything else in terms of the home affairs, you see to the house, ladies must see to the house, they must see to the cooking, they must see to the, the managing the domestic help and the kids madrasa, and also they must the bacha and everything. But what we find is that empirically, and from an Islamic perspective also, that why must even if the husband and wife move apart, why must the child be with the father in the day? So the father can teach him proper beliefs. And then added to that, you find that all the messengers that Allah would wanted, if Allah wanted, Allah could have sent female messengers into the world. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows, and they call this the afdaliyatu tanasub. When Allah gives preference to something else because of suitability. We believe in suitability. Why do men do things and women don't do the same things? Because we believe that certain functions are more suitable for men and so more suitable for women. Women can mix daga, I'm sure. I'm positive about it. But it's just that, look here, maybe men do a better job of mixing daga. You know what I'm saying? So there's suitability. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sent down messengers into the world, they just happen in terms of the gender to be male. And our understanding of our divine law is Allah had wired men as such that they can actually have these conversations better with the children than what women. Not to say that you can't. You can talk about iman, yaqeen and everything to it. But this highlights the father's role in this particular regard. And many times I'm talking to the men folk particularly because, we like to, subcontract the things out, man. You know, like my wife must do this, subcontract everything out, and then afterwards, so Anis, you can't do that on this one. You must see to the iman and yaqeen of your kids and developing their identity, together with your wife, but the lion's share is going to be with you. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thank you for the opportunity. I benefited tremendously from just looking at some resource material that I would love to share with you. But in a nutshell, what did we speak about? We spoke about identity. And don't take it for granted that your kids will be Muslim. They need to make that conscious decision, and you must facilitate it for them. And we saw that, yes, there are a number of influences out there, but all is not doom and gloom. You as a parent, you play a very important, influential role when it comes to your kids. You must live your Islam in order to impress upon them. You can't say Islam is the most beautiful religion in the world, but they don't see that beauty. It is really in and of itself, and nothing, no propaganda is going to change that particular reality. It's for us to show that now. And also, in order to facilitate that, Allah has given us this gift. Create bonds with your kids, emotional closeness with them. Within reason, what really gets to kids and is behaving like a malachi. It works like wonders. And hug them, kiss them, jump up and down. And today I was preparing for this, and I did like wacky stuff at home because I said my daughter, though she doesn't really like to hug me too much, I was chasing around the whole time, hugging her and stuff. And that's why. Connect with your kids. Be there for them. Hug them. Your boys, my boys, they run away from me when I kiss them in public. I kiss them. And I want to hug them and they fight with me and stuff. But then I want them to know that I love them. And that I have the goodwill at heart. And I care for them. And and I also want them to know that there are scoundrels out there that I don't want you to fall prey to. And if you leave the void, and then, so especially, I'm a boys guy, so Abi or Baba, look after your boys. Take care of them. Keep them close to you. Right? Teach them the manly virtues. Teach your boys what gentility is. What does it mean to be a gentleman? And show your girls what it means to be a lady. And between husband and wife, try to mimic that behavior. And you might make a mistake here and there. But if you have that, Allah looks at your heart and your intention, man. And that will come across, inshallah. May Allah protect you and protect your kids. And may your coming here be a means of, enlightenment. A means of fostering better relationship between yourself and your spouses and with your kids, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Are there any questions? You don't have to ask. No pressure. Or a comment or, whatever. Inshallah.
Anyone?
Bismillah. It's for the steam, yeah.
Can Moulana share the source of the last point, the studies and so forth?
Yeah. So if you can just give me your email address.
Okay.
Afterwards, and I'll share it with you. There are 2 articles here. The one is about, and I just really, I read like the article 2-3 times. And there's another article which is very nice about resilience in kids and how to develop resilience. And so I tell you, it's very simple. You want to develop resilience in your kids, and this might sound wacky. The only thing you need to give them is iman. The only thing you need to give them. Once they anchor to iman, then what happens is it's like a coil, they say. You can pull it this way, you can pull it that way, but what's going to happen? It's just going to recoil and stand up like that. The best gift you can give to your kids is a gift of iman. So I'll share both with you. The one is with identity. It's exactly what I said here. Peter, I just regurgitated. And then the other one is about resilience, how to develop resilience within your kids. And that basically the answer, 21 pages, you can skip all of that and just know it's iman. Yeah. But I mean meaningfully, man. Don't say now, okay, I know that I'm not going to read it, it's iman, but then don't do anything about it. Like really developing iman. Can you imagine a time we're not going to be there for your kids? Absolutely, you're right here now. Where are they? But you can give them Allah. And if you give them Allah, wallahi, you've given them everything that they could possibly need through good times and bad times. The best thing you can give your kids ever is give them Allah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tahirin. Allahumma laka alhamdu kulluhu wa laka al-shukru kulluhu wa ilayhi yurja'u al-amru kulluhu. لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك اللهم إننا لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين اللهم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم تب علينا واغفر لنا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم أحيينا وأولادنا على الإسلام ومتنا وأولادنا على الإسلام واحشرنا وأولادنا يوم القيامة مع المتقين مع الإسلام برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا يا رب جمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما لا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا بيننا شقيا ولا محروما برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سببا لمن اهتدى اللهم اهدنا وأولادنا وأحبابنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم خذهم وإيانا بنواصينا إلى الخيرات كلها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم لا تدع في مقامنا هذا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا حاجة هي لك رضا ولنا فيها صلاحا إلا قضيتها وأديتها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصل اللهم وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان ربنا رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah khair to Mullah Muhammad Kaf for that very inspiring presentation. I'm sure you all, including myself, benefited from that. And shukran to you for coming out today and being part of this event. As I mentioned earlier, we will be continuing this specific theme, this meta theme on parenting over the next few months, inshallah. So just keep a lookout for that, specifically on the dates. You can inquire by the library, or you can inquire on Seekers Guidance online. And you can also visit the website if you are interested in learning the various Islamic sciences. Mullah Muhammad, Mullah Irshad, myself, and various other teachers have recorded classes in various Islamic sciences. So if you are interested in that, please visit the website. All learning on Seekers Guidance is free. There's also a question and answer domain whereby you can look at various questions that individuals around the world, around the globe, have asked pertaining to fiqh and other issues, where qualified scholars have responded, have given responses to that. So please visit the website and keep an eye out for the next seminar. It is within our pattern to have at least every month a seminar on critical topics. But as I said, I think this specific topic is very important, very pertinent. So we'd like to stretch it out over the next few months, inshallah. And if you have any suggestions with regards to specific themes, sub-themes on this topic or other topics, please speak to us after the event. And we're more than happy to take that into account and then incorporate that for the future. Maulana Khalil had to leave a bit early, so he apologizes for that. But he did mention that if anyone would like to touch base, if you have any other questions, you can find him at Mizan Institute. They are at Mount View Mosque every Sunday from around 8:30 till about Dhuhr. So inshallah you can meet him there, and then you can have your questions, or you can pose your questions, or you can share your comments and so forth with him. So with that, I wish you all a safe trip home, and we look forward to seeing you. And Jazakallah khair to all those that have streamed from around the world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.